Right now, the gap between what you should save and what you can save has never felt bigger. The U.S. Bank mobile app can help by finding ways to help you reach your savings goals with personalized insights that fit your real life to make your financial goals feel within reach. Because even our tools are smart enough to put people first. U.S. Bank. We'll get there together. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
This is CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Here's John Batchelor.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. To Felix Light of CBS News and the Moscow Times. He is in the Ural Mountains, well east of Moscow, his usual posting. He is in a city called Magnitogorsk, which has a romantic history into the 20th century and the Soviet Union. So we will begin with where Felix is, covering the wildfires of Siberia and the Ural Mountains. Felix, Magnitogorsk, I've read about it, but what was it originally built to be, and what does it appear to you today? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Good evening. It's great to be here. Well, Magnitogorsk is a city possibly close to the heart of U.S.-Russia relations. It was sort of the Russian equivalent in the 1930s, the Stalinist equivalent of a sort of a Gary, Indiana, or a sort of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I should say. Sorry. It was supposed to be a sort of a huge steel-making city. The Soviet Union actually imported sort of American experts and specialists and engineers to help them design this city. It's sort of it's very much in that sort of mold. You know, more recently, it's become a little bit of a depressed place. It's sort of, a lot of post-industrial decay going on here. A lot of people have left the city, but it's still got a sort of huge steel industry. An entire bank of the river's just covered in sort of steel factories. So it really does sort of speak to the history of this place. And I'm here sort of reporting on wildfires because out in the sort of hinterland of the region, it's been a very dry summer, a very hot summer, and fires have been breaking out. We have Putin coming here in a couple of days to visit sort of victims of the wildfires. So it's a big sort of political issue right for the sort of federal center in Moscow, not just for these outlying regions and cities.
Magnitogorsk is an industrial city in the oblast, the province, the state of Chelyabinsk. So we're looking at a vast region of the Ural Mountains by the Ural River near the southern border of the Russian Federation to Central Asia. I want to talk about what remains of the steel mills of the 1930s. We call this the Rust Belt in America. Is there evidence that the steel mills are active, or have they been retired? What does the industrial heart look like to you, Felix?
Well, it's been retained, I think, to a degree. There's a sort of it's an interesting and a very Russian story. There's a sort of a much loved, if you can say that, sort of a local oligarch who's propped up the steel mill. He's propped up the local ice hockey team and really made himself the sort of the boss of the city in these sort of last 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I would say it's certainly not a wealthy city, but it's not sort of fallen into complete decay. You know, there is sort of signs of life. There's very much that the steel mill is still producing, even though all the ore has been dug up here. So it is still very much a city with a life force going on, even if it's, it's got all the standard problems one would associate with such industrial sort of centers of the 20th century now.
So the sports is ice hockey. That's the center of activity. So. It's called the Continental Hockey League. It's quite wonderful.
It is.
And you've written that there's a depopulation underway. Why is that? Why would they leave the city of their birth, and where do they go?
Well, yes, there's a huge sort of question of depopulation in Russia. 20 years ago, a lot of people were sort of saying that, Russia might, there was an article, I think, in The Atlantic in 2001 about how Russians were going to die out. Now, that obviously hasn't happened, and sort of fertility has sort of come up a little bit since the chaotic years of the 90s, when I think there was a really striking drop in sort of fertility and in life expectancy and all that sort of thing. So what we have today is more a sort of situation where Moscow and Petersburg, the two big cities, and maybe a handful of others, are really booming, but much of the rest of the country is shrinking. People are leaving almost every other part of the country, and which is sort of sinking into sort of some kind of economic despair in favor of a handful of very big booming cities. And that seems to be Russia's sort of, certainly its present, and I would suggest its near-term future, a sort of an ever deepening dependence on Moscow, which, is in every sense a booming European city these days, very sort of kitted out in all the sort of latest technologies and fashions, and very sort of prosperous, but really sucking the lifeblood out of the rest of the country.
The city of Magnitogorsk, does it appear to you to have families in it, or are these people my age and maybe a little younger, in their 50s and 60s? What is it like to walk in the central city?
Well, of course, I think everywhere apart from sort of Moscow, St. Petersburg in Russia is very kind of, shall we say, slanted towards pensioners, towards people of sort of retirement age. And I think that is something that's very noticeable. Perhaps less so here than in some of the villages. This morning I was out in the villages reporting on the wildfires, and there you have a very sort of an aging population, and a very economically inactive population. Here it's perhaps a little bit more dynamic, but there certainly is that sort of slant where, anyone who wants to sort of make something of themselves, anyone in their younger years, will generally sort of leave towns like Magnitogorsk and make for Moscow, where you can earn a better living.
The temperatures in Magnitogorsk are quite a swing, I see, from looking it up, from the blizzardy minus Fahrenheit of the January and February to the month that you're in right now is said to be the average, the highs are 102. Are you in the drought now, where you are, Felix?
Well, I must say, speaking to people in the villages that were badly affected by the wildfires, I was told that there hadn't, until today actually, there hadn't been any rain at all since May. We are talking about an exceptionally hot, long and dry summer right now. And I think this is not just a story in sort of the Urals where I am, but it's a story in sort of Yakutia, that huge, vast and freezing cold, remote sort of Siberian region where we've seen the worst of the wildfires. It's the story we've seen in Karelia, which is on the border with Finland, which has also seen wildfires. So it's really a story of sort of Russian proportions, of all Russian proportions. The country is suffering from climate change, from global warming. Summers are getting longer, they're getting hotter, and they're getting drier, and that's bringing wildfires with them.
What are you reporting of the wildfires of the Ural Mountains? Are these unusual? Did they come early? And I believe there was the image in the Moscow Times that you've gone day for night. The fires are so big that there's a glow in the evening rather than darkness.
Yes, well, that specific image was sourced from Yakutia, that sort of huge region in the northeast of Russia, 4 times the size of Texas, where the wildfires have been particularly bad. Now, in the Urals, in this sort of Magnitogorsk, Chelyabinsk area, wildfires are not a sort of everyday occurrence. They're very rare. They don't happen every year. And I think people were particularly disturbed that they did happen this year. What was more was that generally wildfires in Russia do not affect human life or human settlements, simply because the country is so big, it has so much forest, that when the forests burn, they mostly do so in extremely remote areas. But that was not the case this time. I visited a village today where I think a quarter of the houses had actually burnt down in the course of wildfires, and there were a lot of people who were suffering. Vladimir Putin, the president, is visiting, I think, the day after tomorrow. So this is definitely seen as a sort of a top priority political issue to sort of keep any dissent on the wildfires question to a minimum.
What is the expectation of the villagers you visited with? Will they move? Will they be rebuilt? And what about the firefighters? We're told out west the firefighters are exhausted, and even the pool of firefighting that they draw from the prisons is overtaxed. Is that the same situation in the Urals?
Well, here the wildfires are not quite as bad as in Yakutia or as in America, I should say, either. But then that said, I did detect a certain number of people saying, if this is the new normal, if every year we're going to be sort of besieged in our villages by these fires, then we ought to leave. We ought not to live here anymore. And I think it's a big decision for a lot of people. On the other hand, there were an awful lot of people who were very, very keen to stress to me, of course, a foreign journalist, journalist, that they were very supportive of and very hopeful that Putin on his visit here will be supplying them with everything they need to sort of resume their life. Now, this is very much Putin's home turf. This is the part of the country that's very supportive of the president and always has been in sort of comparison to Moscow. But I think it's an interesting question about how sort of these escalating environmental problems play out in the political arena for the president. Clearly there is a very strong incentive, I think, for him to show that he cares, to show that he's doing something for these people out here.
In the center city, Magnitogorsk, did you have an opportunity to learn about the vaccination rate or the virus? Is there a sense that people are cautious about distancing? Or did you see masks, Felix?
I would say that in terms of sort of social distancing, masking, these kind of things, we have a serious reduction, I think, on the situation in Moscow. In Moscow, sort of everyone is distancing, everyone is masked up. Out here, it's a bit more sort of rough and ready. You see a bit less of it. Now, everyone I've spoken to here has been vaccinated, but there are clear signs, I think, everywhere of a big campaign to get people vaccinated out here. There are sort of signs, there's quite a striking sign saying, you've been afraid for long enough, now it's time to vaccinate, striking at this sort of incredible degree of sort of vaccine skepticism that still is in sort of serious evidence among the Russian population.
And the population, your travels there, are the flights filled? Are the airline terminals, are they showing a lot of activity? Is there still hesitation about traveling internally?
No, and I would say that is very sort of typical of Russia. There was some fascinating research put out quite recently that I think Russia is the country where internal air travel has returned to closest to the pre-pandemic level of any country in the world. So I think it's a good sort of indicator of how seriously many Russians are taking the pandemic, which quite frankly is not very seriously at all. There is a lot of sort of just a desire and perhaps even a belief that the pandemic is over and normal life can and should resume. And I think that's been evident for perhaps a year already in Russia, I think.
I hope it is true, Felix, but the reporting from Asia, Southeast Asia, the reporting from Latin America, the reporting from New York City, you know perfectly well that the Delta variant is here and maybe others are coming. Felix Light of CBS News and the Moscow Times is in Magnitogorsk in Chelyabinsk Oblast in the Ural Mountains. When we come back, we're going to turn to the virus and vaccine story for all of the Russian Federation and also politics. Felix mentions Vladimir Putin, always in the center of the conversation of events in Moscow. This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.
Right now, the gap between what you should save and what you can save has never felt bigger. The U.S. Bank mobile app can help by finding ways to help you reach your savings goals with personalized insights that fit your real life to make your financial goals feel within reach. Because even our tools are smart enough to put people first. U.S. Bank. We'll get there together. Equal housing lender, member FDIC.
The sale's on at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com. Stock up for school with 40 to 70% off almost everything and deals from $13. Find it all at Gap Factory and GapFactory.com through August 10th.